There's a lot of pressure on truck drivers and trucking companies, and sometimes that leads them to cut corners and look the other way in efforts to get one more load done.
Are big rig drivers distracted while they're on the road and putting you and your family at risk? Well, that's what we're going to ask on this episode of Ask the Lawyer. Hi, everybody. I'm Rob Rosenthal with AskTheLawyers.com. My guest is attorney Trent Shuping with the Warshauer Law Group in Atlanta, Georgia. Trent, thank you for making some time for us today.
Hey, thanks for having me, Rob.
So, we hear all the time about distracted drivers. That's bad enough when you're driving a regular family automobile, but when you're driving a big rig, an 18-wheeler, I'm guessing it's worse. How common are distracted drivers of the big vehicles like that?
Absolutely, Rob. Distracted driving, frankly, is something that a lot of us have experience with personally, that a lot of us have been affected by, either as a victim of something or, even maybe just sometimes people run off the road. But like you said, when someone's driving an 18-wheeler or a tractor trailer or some sort of big vehicle, the consequences of distracted driving can be even more severe. And unfortunately, professional truck drivers, people that drive those kinds of vehicles for a living, are not immune from the same sorts of distractions that you and I face when we're in our cars. But like you sort of hinted at, with great responsibility of driving a truck like that comes even a heightened more so responsibility to avoid getting distracted by something that's in their phone or some sort of electronic device that's in their cab with them.
So you see the same cell phone distractions, that sort of thing, that you see with the drivers of regular vehicles?
Absolutely. And now let me be clear, of course, the vast majority of professional truck drivers are just that. They're professional truck drivers who do a fantastic job. So I'm not trying to, cast aspersions on a whole industry, or certainly a lot of the people who drive trucks very safely every day. But unfortunately, you do get a couple of bad apples, and you do see wrecks that occur, sometimes even with good drivers, where maybe they just sort of innocently get distracted by something. But you certainly see a range from just drivers who glance down at some sort of electronic device to drivers that are going down the road. We all seen sort of news stories on this. You have drivers that are going down the road carrying on text message conversations, or that are on apps on their phone that are watching videos. They're doing all sorts of things. And we also, obviously the focus tends to be a lot of times now that we have all these new devices that are distracting us. It's true for drivers as well, but you also have just old-fashioned distractions. You see trucking cases where truck drivers have passengers with them that they're not supposed to have. And sometimes they're distracted because they're trying to use the bathroom while driving down the road. So you see all sorts of things, but like you sort of hinted at with the truck drivers, obviously the consequences of that behavior can be catastrophic.
It seems like, Trent, that we forever have heard about, long-haul truckers using some sort of drugs or whatever to try and stay awake and stay alert and that sort of thing. What about drug use amongst truckers? Is that a common thing? And what are we looking at?
Again, as far as sort of how common it is, certainly, hopefully, most truck drivers are clean and are doing the right things, and hopefully most trucking companies are doing the right things. But unfortunately, we do see that it continues to be a problem in that industry, as it is with others, where you have certain truck drivers who do choose to use drugs, and trucking companies that choose not to put in place the proper steps to monitor to make sure that they are not hiring those truck drivers or continuing to employ those truck drivers. There's a lot of pressure on truck drivers and trucking companies, and sometimes that leads them to cut corners and look the other way in efforts to get one more load done. Of course, when they're doing that, they're taking a gamble, and they're gambling with things that aren't theirs. They're gambling with the safety of you and me and our families and everyone on the road. So unfortunately, we do see that. We see trucking accidents that sometimes are caused directly by the drugs that a driver may be affected with, or it may be a case where the truck driver has been up for several multiple dozens of hours in a row, days in a row, and that's causing them to make mistakes because they're fatigued, and it may or may not trace back to the drugs. You also sometimes see it where truck drivers will be driving their trucks in areas of town where they're not supposed to be because they're looking for drugs or seeking something like that. So unfortunately, we do continue to see drug use be a cause for truck accidents as well.
So I think it's probably an obvious answer, Trent, but I think it bears repeating. Explain why it's so much more dangerous for someone who's driving a huge vehicle like that to be distracted or under the influence while operating the vehicle than it is. I mean, it's bad for those of us who are driving our everyday cars, but explain the difference.
Sure, Rob. A lot of it just comes back to sort of everyday physics. Obviously, when you have a truck that can weigh, can be carrying a load somewhere around, 60, 70,000 pounds or more, maybe if it's overloaded, you create all sorts of issues. It takes it naturally a longer distance to stop. So it's even more important that you have an alert driver. If a driver of a big rig or a heavy truck makes a mistake, they start to run off the road or they swerve, obviously you're going to have a different, an outsized effect on their vehicle than you would on a car, just by nature of the fact that they have a heavy load, perhaps an uneven load. Maybe they're carrying regular objects. Sometimes you see flatbed trucks that can be a problem for, or even tanker trucks. If you've got a tanker truck full of something like milk that doesn't even have dividers and space out that liquid, if they slam on their brakes, all the milk's going to come flying forward into the front of that tank. And so the consequences can just be completely outsized. They just have a greater ability to inflict pain and to kill people and to cause really bad things when those vehicles get into wrecks.
If I or a loved one am injured in a collision, some sort of accident with an 18-wheeler like that, Trent, I'm not going to know whether the driver was distracted or under the influence of something. I guess that's another reason why it's so important to get someone like yourself on the case and as quickly as possible, because you can figure that out, correct?
That's absolutely true, Robin. The higher the stakes, the bigger the injury, or if someone has been killed in a wreck involving an 18-wheeler, the bigger the need to get not just any attorney, but to get an attorney who has experience in these types of cases, who knows the right things to look for and the right people to call. Unfortunately, these bad actors, these trucking companies, these truck drivers that make poor choices that lead to these types of wrecks, once the wreck has happened, they will and they do try and cover it up. And you can always know that these trucking firms, these insurance companies have teams of people that are ready 24 hours a day to respond immediately to these scenes. And so they will be there instantly to start collecting evidence. Unfortunately, sometimes we see it that evidence disappears to start influencing the police investigation sometimes. So it's absolutely important because the victims of these wrecks are always going to be a little bit of a step behind. And oftentimes they'll be several weeks or several days behind. But the shorter you can cut that period of time until you, if you're the victim of one of these wrecks, get your own team of people who are working for you and who are looking to find out the truth of why this wreck happened, then the better the outcome is eventually going to be. So it's very important to start investigating these types of things as soon as possible, because you simply start to lose evidence after a couple of days. One great example of that is oftentimes if a wreck takes place, at least somewhere where there's some sort of business around, now with the advent of things like Ring and Nest, on top of the security systems that lots of stores have, there will oftentimes be some video. But for instance, a lot of these stores will tape over it. And so if you're able to get someone out there investigating for you, they might be able to go and find that convenience store, across the street for the intersection and get a hold of that tape of the accident that occurred before it gets erased over. So it's vitally important to get your team out there that knows what they're doing, that's looking out for your interests, that's actually searching for the truth. And one way to do that is by calling an attorney, because trucking attorneys like me and like other folks at our firm, we know what to look for, we know what the rules are, and we know how to hopefully try and find out what really happened.
So you're saying chances are the driver or the company are not going to go, oh, you know what, our guy was on his cell phone and he was distracted at the time. Gosh, we're sorry, it was our fault.
Yeah, sadly, unfortunately, it's just sometimes it doesn't seem to be human nature with the drivers, to be honest, and with the company. Some of these companies have been looking the other way for a long time. Will continue to look the other way as far as the actual things that were taking place leading up to the wreck. Sure. And what happened during the wreck.
Trent, thank you so much for your help as usual. I appreciate it. Thanks for your time today.
Thank you, Rob.
That's going to do it for this episode of Ask the Lawyer. My guest has been attorney Trent Shuping of Atlanta. If you want the best information about truck accidents, or you're ready to choose a lawyer that lawyers choose, make sure to go to askthelawyer.com first. Also, please take a second to like, share, and subscribe by clicking on the button below. Thanks for watching. I'm Rob Rosenthal with askthelawyer.com.